Welcome back, everyone, to Whip's Football Film Room. I'm very excited to start a new series in the channel, the General Manager Series. In this new series, we will analyze NFL team building strategies and tactics, and I will eventually try to apply them myself in mock scenarios. In this series premiere, we will analyze the Eagles roster to understand how Howie Roseman, their general manager, is able to consistently produce Super Bowl caliber teams. I will use Brett Kollmann's 2018 video titled "The Eagles Are Changing How NFL Rosters Are Built" as the inspiration for this analysis. Brett broke down what he calls the Howie Roseman formula to illustrate the strategy behind the Eagles' 2017 Super Bowl championship. These 5 criteria have held up for the most part, but my goal is to look at the last 5 years and determine how Roseman has either adhered to this or changed his strategy. Let's get to it. The first and most important criterion for the Howie Roseman formula is that starting, backup, and currency quarterbacks are essential. In 2020, Roseman drafted Jalen Hurts at number 53 overall in the second round, enraging many Eagles fans since the year prior they went 9-7 with Carson Wentz and made the playoffs. Not to mention, Wentz had a cap hit of $18 million, good for 17th in the league. After a 4-11 year with Wentz as a starter, being benched midway through the season for Hurts, Roseman felt confident to then trade Wentz to the Colts for a 2021 third-round pick, that offseason's draft, and a conditional 2022 second-round pick that turned into a first-round pick, which was this most recent draft. Roseman utilized all 3 aspects of Criteria 1 by drafting backup quarterback Jalen Hurts in the second round, which allowed him not only have another starting quarterback on the roster, but also allowed him to gain extra resources off the former starting quarterback Carson Wentz. Flashback to after Nick Foles led the Eagles to the Super Bowl, he received a massive raise that made him the 20th highest paid quarterback in the league. Once that contract expired 1 year later in 2019, the Eagles let him walk in free agency to Jacksonville on a 4-year, $88 million contract. Due to compensatory pick rules designed to compensate teams for their high-value losses in free agency, the Eagles received a third-round pick. Roseman again was able to turn a former starting quarterback into currency that gained them resources. All this movement and trading done with quarterbacks wouldn't be nearly as effective if Roseman hadn't adhered to the second criterion of the formula, commit high-value resources to the O-line and D-line. In the 2019 offseason alone, Roseman was busy signing defensive end Brandon Graham, center Jason Kelce, guard Isaac Sumalo, left tackle Jason Peters, guard Brandon Brooks, and right tackle Lane Johnson to considerably large extensions, all of which are current or former Pro Bowl players besides Sumalo. In 2020, Javon Hargrave packed up and moved east across Pennsylvania from Pittsburgh on a 3-year, $39 million deal, and he's now become the 3rd best interior pass rusher in the league, only behind All-Pros Aaron Donald and Chris Jones. Jordan Mailata came to the team in 2018 as an Australian rugby player and developed his game to earn a 4-year, $64 million deal to be the franchise left tackle. Just this past offseason, Hassan Reddick was brought on board for $15 million a year after racking up 11-plus sacks with the Cards and Panthers 2 years in a row. He just so happened to be second in sacks this season with 16. If you look at the numbers post-2017, only Carson Wentz, Darius Slay, and A.J. Brown have received contracts for anything near the cheapest ones Roseman has dealt to his O-line and D-line. Here is a list of first and second round draft picks since 2017. The 2 picks spent on wide receiver stand out, and I chalk this up to a combination of team needs and the recent explosion of wide receiver talent coming out of college football. The 2 years after 2020 is where we really see this commitment heat up. In 2021, Roseman spent a second and third round pick on Alabama guard Landon Dickerson and Louisiana Tech defensive tackle Milton Williams. The former starts at guard currently, and the latter is a part of their heavy rotation on defense. In April of this year, the Eagles traded up to draft Georgia defensive tackle Jordan Davis with the number 10 overall pick, and then selected Nebraska center Cam Jurgens with pick number 51. All these drafted players have made considerable impacts on this team in their first 2 years, including a Pro Bowl selection this year for Landon Dickerson. This is also the first time Rose has made some considerable in-season moves, as he traded a 4th-round pick to the Bears for defensive end Robert Quinn in Week 7 after he came off an 18.5 sack season in 2021. And then he signed two former All-Pro defensive tackles in Linval Joseph and Adama Sue to fill in for Jordan Davis's brief stint on IR. Roseman's commitment to the offensive line and defensive line has been recognized by the media and the league alike. Each year, he manages to sign a new free agent to a large deal or draft a player or multiple players within the top 3 rounds. He knows that he needs to not only keep the good players he acquires, but also to sustain consistent depth as a part of his philosophy to rotate D-line, create competition, and have veteran presence for young players. Spending high-value draft capital on these two position groups ensures that the Eagles always have a chance at being the league's best across 2 units that can ultimately make or break a play each and every snap. This is the first amendment I'm going to make to the original formula. Instead of spend money at safety, not cornerback, I'm adapting this to spend money at the most essential DB group for your defense. In the past, Kollmann identified that Roseman never spent money at cornerback and allocated a ton to the safety position. Kollmann's rationale at the time was that the safeties were asked to do a lot more in their defensive scheme. In the 4-3 cover 3 scheme made popular by the Legion of Boom Seahawks, the safeties must be able to interchange at single high, box play, match up with tight ends and running backs, blitz, and still maintain ability to tackle and play traditional 2-high zones. It makes sense to get guys who can for a fact do all of this at a high level, which is why Roseman opted for veterans in free agency to get this done. To contrast this, cornerbacks in the same scheme are not required to do much outside of deep third on the perimeter and man-to-man coverage. It makes sense that the players who have lesser responsibility would have a lesser cap hit. Right off the bat, let's look at the cap allocation for safeties post-2017. 2018, 20th, 2019, 2nd, 2020, 22nd, 2021, 22nd again, 2022, 30th. They are projected dead last for 2023 spending on the safety position. I attribute the 2019 cap ranking to contract restructuring that likely created space in the past by pushing cap hit down the road to the future. Still, after 2019, the Eagles rank in the lower half to bottom third of league spending on safety, a 180-degree pivot from the pre-2017 trend. For corners, the numbers look like this. 2018, 32nd, 2019, 27th, 2020, 24th, 2021, 11th, 2022, 9th. Again, a similar trend appears here with a quick shift to the opposite third in spending for the position group. And if you aren't convinced enough, the Eagles are projected to be top of the league in cornerback spending in 2023 after retaining both Darius Slay and James Bradberry. The reversal of trends of the Eagles' cap allocation is remarkable. Roseman's strategy hasn't changed when acquiring cornerbacks, though. He sent a 3rd-round pick and 5th-round pick to Detroit for Darius Slay, a Pro Bowler. His contract extension was 3 years, $50 million, making him the highest-paid cornerback at the time. He acquired Avonte Maddox, a starting slot corner, in the 4th round to replace Patrick Robinson after 2017, and he acquired James Bradberry in 2022 soon after he was released from the Giants due to salary cap issues. His deal was 1 year, $10 million. Neither of those additions involved high-value resources like 1st and 2nd round picks or players. In the 2021 offseason, the Eagles brought in Jonathan Gannon to be their defensive coordinator. Gannon had spent the last 3 years with the Colts as a DB/cornerback coach alongside Nick Sirianni, who was the Colts offensive coordinator and became the Eagles head coach in 2020. In Gannon's new scheme, multi-front quarters, the corners are asked to do much more than previously in their cover 3 scheme. Gannon's scheme sees a lot of cover 2, 4, and 6, along with quarters coverage underneath, all of which are 2 high safety coverages. When safeties are being asked to just play a couple of deep zones that are easier and simpler than cover 3, then they are less essential to the coverage than the cornerbacks. Quarters coverage no longer refers to strict zones, as today's NFL is using what's called match quarters more frequently. In match quarters coverage, the cornerback is often given the assignment of press man coverage on an island, meaning he must cover a receiver anywhere he goes. Gannon's scheme relies on this for when they want to run man coverage, meaning the cornerbacks must be able to handle the star receivers in the NFL. In Roseman's eyes, there isn't a lot of time for a draft and develop strategy given this amount of responsibility. If you look at the DB group, most of the safeties on the roster are drafted young guys, where the corners are veteran free agent acquisitions. So to me, the third criterion should be to spend money at the most essential DB group for your scheme. The fourth criterion of the Howie Roseman formula is that right tackle is a new premium offensive line position. Since Lane Johnson has been dominating at right tackle his whole career, this part of the formula hasn't changed. With that being said, I want to take this opportunity to introduce an entirely new philosophy to the formula. Tight end is a position that is mirrored from 2017 with Dallas Goedert now and Zach Ertz then. I think Roseman sees the value in having an elite mismatch weapon at tight end due to the volume of passing in the league. Having a great tight end is also essential to having a great run game, which the Eagles have clearly valued over the years too. Goedert was drafted with the Eagles' first pick in 2018 in the second round. The Eagles had both Ertz and Goedert playing in a split role until Ertz was traded in October of 2021 to the Cardinals. Goedert had become the better of the two at that point, and Roseman signed him to a contract extension in November of the same year to a $14 million average contract over 5 years. Roseman spent high second-round picks on both Ertz and Goedert and signed them to contracts putting them in the top 5 of the position group at their times. Both are elite receiving weapons over elite run blockers, but this can be supplemented via rotation at the position. Philly has led the league in 2 tight end personnel packages since 2018, averaging 37% of their plays in 12 personnel. This is likely due to 2 factors. First, the Eagles have had a fantastic tight end duo in Ertz and Goedert over the last 4 years. And second, the Eagles have not had great wide receivers over the last 4 years. It could also be attributed to the fact that Roseman places a value on tight end as a premium receiving weapon in the NFL today. It may just be a coincidence, but the alpha receiver on many recent teams to play in the Super Bowl was a tight end, not a receiver. Super Bowl 55, Gronk and Kelsey. 54, Kelsey and Kittle. 53, Gronk. 52, Ertz and Gronk. 51, Gronk. And 50, Olsen. That's a lot of Gronk, and this suggestion is obviously confounded with quarterback play, but in my opinion, it shows the importance of having that elite tight end as a matchup weapon for a quarterback to have as his go-to guy. Overall, I think part 4 of the formula should also recognize the importance of having an elite receiving weapon at tight end. The fifth and final criterion of the Howie Roseman formula is be ready to change and adapt every season. The best and most consistent leaders can adapt so their teams are never at a disadvantage of a changing landscape around them. One could argue that Roseman saw Hurts as a modern quarterback that could attack with his legs and arm. This is an adaptation of modern defenses that prioritize pass rush and pass coverage. The idea that elite tight ends are valuable isn't revolutionary, but Roseman approached the position similar to how he does quarterback. Even after they won the Super Bowl, he invested their first pick in Dallas Goedert, a player that wouldn't impact right away, but would allow the team to have a replacement for Ertz when he inevitably aged out. The change in commitment from safety to corner was an adaptation of 2 high quarters coverages that now ask more of corners and less of safeties. He also adapted by bringing in a disciple of Vic Fangio, the innovator of modern defensive schemes in the NFL. Notice that the defensive coordinator prior to him was a disciple of the popular Cover 3 defenses that took over the league until very recently. I believe this is intentional. Roseman adapts by hiring whoever is qualified for installing the defense that is most effective at the time and then moving off that scheme once it gets phased out by offensive adjustments. Roseman makes all these things work by not being static in his approach to team building. Some things in the NFL don't change quickly, such as the value of quarterback or the necessity for a good offensive line. Others, such as positional evaluation for defensive backs, running backs, and D-line depth, do change with adapting offensive and defensive schemes. Roseman knows that he must study the game and who is succeeding, why they are succeeding, and how things will inevitably change once the league begins to copy the success formulas of others. I can't tell you how the Eagles' future will play out, but at the very least I know that with Howie Roseman at the helm, they are always destined to rise to the top. If I was a Philadelphia Eagles fan, I'd be very grateful to have him as a leader of my team.